All right, thank you. Yes, cue me when you're ready.
And here we go. We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be nominal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger, with planet.
Water towers, fly! Yes!
Tango down to nominal.
Flighting down to SC off. Bring in SC off. It's orange!
R45! Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage. Put that in the big bag, Tingle.
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
The methane would be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You good? We don't need any more of these.
Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you might be in the world. This is Lon Seidman here on behalf of NSF, and we've got a fun one for you today, an interview with the Vice President of Vulcan Development at the United Launch Alliance. Mark Peller is joining us. He's got 34 years of experience in the industry. He worked on our beloved space shuttle and many of the other rockets that we have become very familiar with over the years. And there's a new rocket, of course, that we just witnessed launching not too long ago. It's behind me right here, the Vulcan rocket. And Mark is going to join us to talk about this new program, what they've learned so far, and a lot of other details as well. We only have him for a short time today, so we're not going to be able to take viewer questions from the chat. However, we've got a lot of great questions that came from the community that we're going to be asking Mark today. So first of all, Mark, welcome to the program. Thank you very much for joining us today. You must feel pretty good about what happened with Vulcan's first launch.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And we're really excited coming off our successful first launch. Look forward to talking to you and your audience some more about that.
One of the things that struck me about it, and I watched it again this morning, getting ready for today's interview, is that it felt very much like every other ULA launch. And that's not a disparaging comment. It's just the fact that it looked so normal. I think we've grown accustomed to first launches having some wacky things happening. This one really just went, at least by my casual observer's eyes, as perfectly. Obviously, you have access to more data. What did you learn from that first launch? Are there things that you think need to change within the system, or did it all work to your expectations?
Yeah, well, first of all, it did go very smoothly as it appeared. We have a very seasoned, experienced team with experience, building and launching Atlas and Delta rockets, and we've carried this team over and all that experience and brought it over to Vulcan. Vulcan, there on that first launch, benefited from an extensive amount of testing at the component subsystem system level, including a lot of testing of the rocket at the launch site. So we've been through that count many times, including a flight readiness firing of the booster. And so our team was ready, the rocket was ready, ground systems were ready, and we had a very smooth countdown and launched at the opening of the window there in that first opportunity there in January. The mission itself, looking back on it in flight, was incredibly smooth as well. We made big investments, obviously, to burn down risk and try to learn our lessons on the ground. But even then, I think we were surprised by how clean the actual flight was, because there's always things that occur in flight that, despite your best efforts to simulate or test, you can't exactly replicate on the ground. And we did learn, but those things are fairly minor in nature.
And as someone who obviously was invested heavily in this project as the head of it, when you get to that moment where you're about to launch, you can't pilot it. This thing has to basically survive on its own with the instructions and engineering that went into the computers on board, but also the hardware systems. How does it feel for you emotionally after all of this work? You've been doing this for 34 years, but this is a completely new system. What did you feel like? Were you excited, scared, both? What is it like at that point, knowing everything you know about the system?
Well, certainly exciting. I've been through this before in different capacities, whether it was the first flight of Delta IV years ago when I worked on that, or as the chief engineer for that program on the day of launch, whether it was years leading up to that to develop the rocket or months leading up to process a specific mission and a payload and prepare that. Those are trying, can be stressful times. And the day of launch, while it looks really smooth, there's still a lot going on in the background. It can be a very stressful time. But for me, when we finally come out of that final hold into terminal count, and for Vulcan, that's 7 minutes and counting, in some ways the stress kind of goes down a notch, because at this point, as you said, everything from that point forward on the ground and later after we lift off is pre-programmed. It's the result of years of hard work and effort that went into it, and you're just watching all your efforts come together as we go through and go down the countdown, get closer to T0 and get the rocket ready to go. And then when we actually launch, my advice to everyone is to enjoy it. I mean, obviously we monitor data, but to enjoy it and take it all in. But it is a funny feeling, and particularly this time, there was a point about T-minus 30 seconds where, the rocket was ready to fly. There was just a few remaining items to be configured on the ground system before we went for main engine start or booster engine start. And I had this feeling, I can't stop this. This is really going to happen, which is a good feeling, but an unusual feeling. And as you saw, fortunately, everything went really well for the rest of the countdown and the entire plus count.
And it looks like every bit of hard work that went into that really, really paid off there for you. Now, we wanted to go into some of the technical issues or questions that our community had along with our NSF contributors. And one of those was related to the solid rocket boosters. Was there a decision made at some point, obviously, to have solid rocket boosters to supplement the thrust versus making that center core more powerful? What was the thought process that went into that?
Sure. That all gets back to our, and I'll use Tori Bruno's terminology, our dial-a-rocket thinking. And basically our charter with Vulcan was to develop a new rocket that would do everything that Atlas and Delta did, but in one system, ranging from medium lift to very high lift, things that we do on Delta IV with that 3-body core vehicle, but do it in a single core. And so to have that versatility, solids were really a key element of that. If we had stuck with solely a liquid core to get performance equivalent to or greater than a Delta IV, it would have been a big booster. I'm sure it would have been very well performing that particular application, but it would have been maybe not well suited to some of the other missions that we support. So the solid rocket boosters give us versatility to support a wide range of missions and to support that range of missions without compromise in terms of performance.
So you have some flexibility in small, medium, and large, if you will, to get it configured there. And this was a very new system from top to bottom, and you have obviously a brand new core first stage and all that went into that. But the Centaur second stage was also new. How did it do, and did it meet its design goals in orbit?
Yeah, Centaur worked very well, and we call it Centaur. It is the next generation Centaur, but it's a pretty significant departure from the Centaur that we've flown for many years on Atlas and on other programs. And it performed very well, and that was something we were watching, because an upper stage is one of the most difficult things to validate on the ground. It's most difficult, obviously, to simulate the environments of vacuum and space. And so we rely upon a lot of simulation versus tests. But all that work combined with our experience of operating both the Centaur 3 on Atlas and the Delta IV cryogenic upper stage really paid off. And we had a really smooth flight of Centaur.
And there's some generational development here too, right? So you're taking what you know about the prior generation, even though this new one is new and different. I would imagine there's some things that kind of carry forward through the lineage, right?
Sure. I mean, Centaur remains a very highly efficient, high energy upper stage. So using liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen as propellants, which are well suited to on-orbit applications and very efficient. really well suited to that upper stage application. Centaur has always had a relentless focus on mass optimization or reducing the dry mass of the stage, because every pound we can take out of the upper stage is an extra pound of payload that we can take to orbit. And so that basic methodology continued in some of the design practices, but the detailed design and how we produce it really took advantage of the latest technology. But Centaur is, very structurally efficient, being a pressure stabilized, thin wall stainless steel tank. Just the minimum amount of weight necessary to hold the propellant, react the loads, and safely deliver the payload to orbit.
Lots of precision, I would imagine. And speaking of precision, on that first flight, as we were talking about, everything went very smoothly, both from what we saw and also what you were able to measure with your data. You have a second flight, obviously, coming up, and many more to come after that. What will the ramp up to the next Vulcan flight look like, and what have you integrated now into the flight system that you learned from the first one?
Sure. So we're putting the finishing touches on the vehicle for next flight. It's still in our factory booth, the booster and upper stage. And it's in final assembly, and that will ship out here in the next month or so to the launch site. We did have some learning for first flight. Mostly that is just getting more familiar with how the rocket actually operates in real service, how it flies. So most of that is updating, models and analytical predictions. It will drive some minor changes to how we fly the rocket, but no significant hardware changes are required coming out of first flight. No significant learning that would drive a major change to the design of the vehicle. So, getting past first flight is not, driving the timing for our next mission. So we'll get the hardware down to the launch site here in the next couple of months, and we're ready to fly again here this summer.
What also struck me was that you could get the Vulcan prepared in the same space as your Atlas rockets were. So that was probably part of the design thought process as well, was to try to minimize changes of the ground systems too, right?
Yeah, so launch pads are, as you mentioned earlier, they're big, they're significant pieces of infrastructure. And so from the beginning, we had elected to fly Vulcan out of modified versions of the Atlas pad. On the East Coast at Slick 41, we have a couple-year overlap between the flyout of the Atlas program and introduction of Vulcan into service. So we spent several years modifying that pad, which was a challenge in itself because we had to do that in between Atlas launches. It was an active facility, modifying it to accommodate Vulcan and its unique requirements. And so what we have now down there is a multi-use pad that can support both rockets and can be configured from one to the other in literally just a few days. And that was really the key to the introduction of Vulcan into that facility down there. And so that's serving us well. The next launch out of Slick 41 is actually going to be an Atlas coming up later this spring before we get picked back up with Vulcan.
It's pretty amazing how much goes into the things that don't fly as goes into the things that do. And the ground systems are an impressive feat of engineering on their own. And as Vulcan was being developed, did you have, obviously there must have been a multitude of different ideas at the initial outset as to what this new system would look like and how it would function. I'm sure there were things that were tossed out. Were there designs that were kind of early in the process that you really liked but just couldn't make work realistically given all the limitations you had with the ground systems and what the customers need?
Yeah, pretty early on, we settled on the basic system architecture, very similar to what you see now. In some ways, I would call it the Atlas or even the Delta IV medium system architecture on steroids to get, maximize the performance from that. So that architecture has persisted throughout the development. When we first started, we were going to bite this off in chunks and initially fly with the existing version of Centaur V. So if you get your hands on some old artist renderings, and there's still models floating around, there was a variant of Vulcan with Centaur 3 on top and a 4-meter payload fairing as one option. And later, we realized that we needed to move forward more quickly. And that's when we moved forward in conjunction with the new first stage development of Centaur V. But other than that, at least, from a distance, they all look pretty similar. Obviously, a lot of evolution in the detailed design under the skin, so to speak, as we went through the critical design of the vehicle.
So it's really what's inside is what counts, right?
Right.
And we have another feature of that launch pad down there in Florida where crew can actually get on board a vehicle if they wish, hopefully in the near future with Boeing's Starliner. Is Vulcan going to have to go through changes to be human rated for future manned or crewed missions that might go up?
Yeah, so right now, ULA, we're very focused on working with our Boeing and NASA partners to go fly crew on Starliner on Atlas, and that's actually next up for the Atlas program. And we have a number of missions planned for Starliner on Atlas. So that's really our focus with our Boeing and NASA partners right now. The Vulcan system was designed to be just as capable or more capable in Atlas than Atlas, and would be well suited to supporting crewed missions. But as I said, right now we're focused on flying crew on Atlas. Someday when that time comes, we're ready to have those discussions with our customers and think that that would be a fairly straightforward move to move crew onto Vulcan. Our experience human rating Atlas served us well in development of Vulcan and preparing it for that. So really in terms of vehicle modifications, they're really minor. The most significant of which is we would implement the emergency detection system that was first developed for Atlas. We would implement that and integrate it into the Vulcan system to monitor the vehicle's health and keep the crew informed during ascent of the vehicle's readiness to support the mission.
And I guess too, it's just a matter of keeping those G-forces under control on the way up. Obviously, with a uncrewed mission, you have a little more flexibility, but with the crew, you want to make them somewhat comfortable as they're accelerating up there, right? And I guess that's more around the programming side.
Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. We fly, so the rocket is very flexible in how we fly it, and even for missions without crew, sometimes we fly some really precious spacecraft that have their own limitations, and we need to protect them during ascent. And so we're very accustomed to shaping the trajectories to stay within the capabilities of the payload or the crew if it's a human rated mission.
And what kind of cadence do you think you can see with Vulcan? Especially scaling up the production. Are you seeing that there's some opportunities to perhaps have a scalability here greater than the current generation of rockets, or is it going to be about the same level?
Yeah, for us, we're looking at significantly scaling up our rate. And it's not just something we're interested in, it's something that the market's demanding. As we talked about on the day of first launch, we had a backlog of over 70 missions, which is really unheard of in this industry. Those are numbers you're accustomed to hearing when you're talking about the launch of a new commercial aircraft, not a rocket. And so the market and our customers are demanding that, not just that we get into service, but that we get up to rate as soon as we can. And there's a couple things, it's just not a plan to try harder. There's a plan behind it. And it's something we've been working on for several years before we even flew the first rocket. We build all of our rockets in our facility in Decatur in northern Alabama, state-of-the-art 1.6 million square foot factory that's built Delta and Atlas and most recently Vulcan. And we're dedicating that facility solely to the production of Vulcan. So we built out the last Delta, and by the end of this year, we'll build out the last Atlas. So as we build out those heritage rockets, we're able to allocate more floor space to Vulcan to enable us to build Vulcan at higher rate. Plus, we're making further investments in that factory with another 500,000 square foot addition to that. So we're going to be in a position to pump out Vulcans at a much higher rate. So the other limiting factor then becomes launch sites. The majority of our launches are on the East Coast. We will have the ability here next year to launch Vulcan on the West Coast, but we're making significant investments on the East Coast to get us to a point where we can launch every other week on that kind of cadence. And one of the key things we're doing there is building a second Vulcan mobile launch platform and a second vertical integration facility. So this gives us two processing lanes, still firing off the same pad. The pad is not your constraining point in the flow. It's those processing facilities and the mobile launch platform. So each lane nominally would launch once a month. And so that's a combined rate of every other week off the pad. And so we're looking at getting to a rate of 25 or more fairly quickly here.
Wow, and it's going to keep us busy. We've been having a hard time here at NSF keeping up with all the activity in the space industry, so I think we're going to get even busier here. And on the West Coast, that's Slick 3E. Is that the pad?
That is correct.
And that's on track for 2025, you think?
Yeah, correct. So similar to the East Coast, Slick 3 East was our Atlas pad and was well suited to modification for Vulcan. We did fly out the last West Coast Atlas mission in late 2022. So our approach on the West Coast is a little different. In other words, the mods that we make don't have to be backward compatible. We're not having to modify it around an active Atlas launched cadence. So after that last Atlas mission, we took the pad hard down. It's all torn up. It's a construction site right now. And we're starting to build it back up with the capabilities necessary to support Vulcan. And we're working to have initial operating capability toward the end of first quarter next year. And we have a number of missions on the manifest starting next summer in 2025.
So lots going on there on the ground side as well. And when we look at Vulcan, and you mentioned earlier that you kind of have an open design that can have things simply stated bolted on to give it more capabilities, or configured in such a way to kind of meet the customer needs. Are you seeing any need for derivatives of the Vulcan design based on customer requests yet, or do you think the current design will kind of meet all of that? Because obviously, when you first start designing a rocket, the industry might be in a slightly different place than it might be when you put it into operation. Are you seeing any derivatives that might come from your initial design, or you think you'll be able to handle it within the current one?
Oh, absolutely. So we're operating in a very competitive marketplace, and we need to continue to evolve our product to respond to the needs of our customers and to be relevant in that marketplace. So we have a couple things that we're going to be rolling in, upgrades to Vulcan in the next 1 to 2 years. A couple of those were things that were pre-planned earlier in development. There were some capabilities that we wanted to incorporate into Vulcan that we said, let's pause, let's take some time to get focused on getting to first flight, and we'll on-ramp those capabilities a year or so down the road. So next year we'll fly an upgraded airborne avionics suite as well as upgraded flight software. That's both basically performance related in addressing our supply base. And then we also have some performance improvements, some incremental performance improvements at both stages that will be rolling in. And those two together really complete Vulcan as what we had originally envisioned it when we kicked the program off. But since then, listening to our customers, listening to the market, we have undertaken the development of a fairly significant upgrade to the upper stage, really focused on optimizing performance to low Earth orbit. And this is one of our keys to helping our Amazon customer in deployment of their Kuiper constellation. The upper stage that we just flew is designed to support a wide range of missions, anywhere from low Earth orbit to high energy missions like direct inject to geostationary or interplanetary. So in some ways, for some missions, it's a bit of a compromise. And LEO was one of those missions. And so we're developing a LEO optimized Centaur that's actually a little bit smaller. We actually want to carry less propellant in the upper stage to maximize performance to LEO. And so we're developing that little bit shorter Centaur optimized for LEO, and we will introduce that into service next year as we support deployment of the Kuiper constellation and other commercial, civil, and NSSL missions that would benefit from flying that configuration.
And you also have a brand new engine on this rocket, one that hadn't flown before either, the BE-4. Did the engine majorly change over the development of Vulcan? How did you work with your partners there to get the right mix here between what you wanted out of the rocket and what the engine could provide?
Yeah, so the rocket performed great on the first flight, and we had really high confidence going into first flight. The Blue Origin team had, been very rigorous throughout the entire development and an extensive, ground test campaign. So we were really confident going into first flight, and it performed really well. The engine, similar to the rocket, from the basic system architecture and basic requirements, the performance specs was, really unchanged for many, many years. Obviously, as Blue Origin went through the detailed development, got more hot fire experience under their belt, the design was optimized, but it's the same, same basic configuration, same cycle, same design point that we originally set out, and it hit all of those design points in the mission. So we're very happy. and looking forward to continuing that partnership.
And a whole new fuel system too. Everything is switching over to, to methane, I guess, right? So it's a very different rocket than perhaps you would work with in the past there.
Yeah, liquefied natural gas. I think a lot of people were concerned about that. I think that was actually probably one of the smoother parts of the on-ramping of the new technologies for the rocket. That actually went really well. We had the benefit, one that obviously Blue Origin was getting experience with ground testing the engines. We also did a number of Pathfinder tanking tests starting over 2 years ago to flush out our modified facilities at the launch site, as well as get experience loading propellant in the vehicle and operating the vehicle. And then, of course, earlier last year, we did the flight readiness firing. So when it came to actual day of launch, all the operations associated with use of liquefied natural gas, which is the commercial variant of methane, went real smoothly for us. There's certainly over the
sorry, go ahead.
2 years.
And we had a question here from the team about a mythical triple core Vulcan at some point that had been talked about. Could it exist? Are there challenges to making something like that work?
That's really, from a technology standpoint, I would say it's fairly straightforward. It's really, watching the market and the needs of our customers. And is there a compelling need? Is there an underlying business case to make those investments and bring that capability forward? We have a lot of experience flying 3-body core booster configurations. That's the Delta IV Heavy. And so we know how to do it. And so we'll continue to talk to our customers, watch the market, and see what direction we take with further development of Vulcan.
And we have just a few minutes left here, and I did want to get in a few about, or at least one question about reusability and the future. I know that there are some plans for making portions of Vulcan reusable. What are your thoughts about it? Obviously, there's a lot of challenges in making a rocket reusable because it does impact your overall performance, and there's costs involved in bringing things back and refurbishing them. What do you see as the future for reusability, if you will, on Vulcan or parts of it?
Yeah, well, we think reusability is great, whether it's what we propose or what other people have done in the marketplace. But we look at reusability through the lens of value, value that we ultimately provide to our customer. And so, as you said, when you implement reusability, you want to get the most value out of what you recover and your ability to quickly and efficiently reuse it. And you want to minimize the impact of the primary mission because different reusability schemes take away from performance to different extents. So you really have to balance those two considerations and come up with something that makes the most economic sense. And that's really what has driven our approach to reusability. The other thing is, what works for reusability for us doesn't work for other rockets. There are different system architectures, and different approaches to reusability are better suited to each of those architectures. Vulcan's a really high-performing booster. We get a significant portion of our Delta V to get on orbit from the booster, reserving a lot of that capability of the upper stage for additional maneuvers on orbit and going to higher energy orbits. As I said, things like direct inject to geostationary or interplanetary. So when Vulcan stages, it is flying high and hot and far downrange. And so that really drove our thinking to pursue an approach where we're looking at non-propulsive downrange recovery and recovery of the most valuable elements of the booster, which is really the aft module of the vehicle, which contains the engine and other key subsystems. And so we do that through use of an inflatable. We will do that through the inflatable heat shield that we have been in development in partnership with NASA and have demonstrated on missions where we've released one on orbit from Centaur and recovered payloads. And so we're active right now working on that, and that's a change that we plan to implement down the road.
Excellent. And the reusability, obviously, it makes a lot of sense to try to get the most expensive parts out of it because many other parts of the rocket are just the tank. And I guess there's probably no immediate plans for that, but it seems like that's kind of designed into the Vulcan design overall, right?
Right.
All right. Well, one last question for you, because we do have to wrap up. I know your time is short here. We have a lot of people watching who are very much interested in the space industry. The space industry, I think, is probably growing faster than you've probably seen it in your career, if I'm not mistaken, given all the things that we cover here. What are you looking for people who are eager to get into this industry from an employment perspective? What kind of training do they need to have? What should they think about studying? What in your mind is the path that someone should take right now if they want to get into this industry and be a part of exploring the solar system and beyond?
Well, the number one thing is passion. I mean, be passionate about the mission, and that's most important, and that will guide you throughout your career. To launch a rocket, it takes all sorts of technologies and backgrounds. So there's great opportunity, whether you want to go into engineering or production or procurement. Within engineering, obviously, there are dozens of different disciplines that we require. But whatever is of interest to you, pursue it passionately. Get experience under your belt, get your feet wet, try working in different areas, and find out what really motivates you and where you can make the biggest contribution.
Excellent. Well, on that note, I want to thank you for joining us today. This is a great opportunity to hear from somebody who's involved in the actual development of the things that we cover here. So, Mark, very, very appreciative of you and your time today. I know how busy you are building rockets, and we'll let you get back to doing that. And I can tell you we've got a lot of passionate people watching who I'm sure might be one day coming by to say hello in the office there. So thanks again for all that you're doing here. Congratulations on the success of your first launch, and we look forward to covering every launch you have in the future as well. So thanks again.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the time to talk more about Vulcan. I always enjoy that.
And I want to thank everybody for tuning in to this episode of NSF Live. We have these all the time, so be sure to hit the follow button there. And we greatly appreciate all of the support that we receive from you, the audience, because that is what makes this show possible. So we will be back again very soon with a launch and more coverage of this very exciting time in space exploration. And until next time, this is Lon Seidman. Thank you all for watching.
And here we go. We have liftoff.
Propulsion continues to be nominal.
RS-68 chamber pressure looks good.
Rolling up. Roger, Atlantic.
Water towers fly! Yes! Tango down to nominal.
Fighting downside SPD off. Bring in SPD off. Off. It's orange!
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage. What do you think? Put that in the big bag,
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed. We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
This methane will be igniting with the flare, correct?